G'day everyone, welcome back to the shed, and today I'm going to talk about my other HG ute, and yes, it does sort of border a little bit on obsessive and addictions and things like that, but couldn't help myself when this one came along. Now, I will admit that when I bought this car, I was looking for parts for the brown car. The brown car was uniquely optioned, and there was a lot of stuff that was missing from it that I've had to track down because it had lived several lives, several owners, and various people had done things to it. Now, this particular car came out of South Australia. I bought it off eBay, and as soon as I spotted the ad, I realised it was something a little bit more than the average Kingswood ute. So we'll go into that in a minute, but it was the world's worst advertised car. Scrolling through eBay, and I even went past it a few times over a couple of days because the ad just said HG ute, and there was no picture on it or anything like that. And I thought, yeah, and it had a price, and I thought, I'm not in the market for a ute. Anyway, a few days later, I scroll past it again, so I click the button, and there's a handful of photos. And so it just says HG ute. Okay, nothing more. And one of the photos shows the full instrument dash, the GDS dash, and in the corner of that photo, I could see under the dash, the corner of the factory air conditioner. And I thought, it's air conditioned. And I thought, right, got my attention straight away. So I thought, we're going to have to do some dealing here. I also noticed that it had these wheels on it. Now, this is the most suspicious thing ever. I'll talk about these a bit. This is a Hustler mag, and they were a very common accessory for these cars, and a lot of dealers fitted them to this model run as original equipment. So even though the factory didn't fit them, the dealer would put them on a new car and they'd go through the yard and a car may have worn this type of wheel from day one. They were also fitted to a lot of trade-ins, and so when a car came back that might have been 18 months, 2.5 years old, and a dealer was just trying to compete with the current model, they'd throw a set of these wheels on them. But here's the thing that got my attention. This particular set of wheels has got the raw cast in the centres of the wheels. Normally these were painted and they had a polished rim around the edge, and they came in either a dark silvery grey colour or black, and that was the norm. But GMH built a run of unusual cars, and they weren't actually a specific car, they were just unusual cars. And the first one was the show car that they built for the 1970 Melbourne Motor Show, which they called B-Ute, so Butte. B-Ute had these wheels exactly on it, and that was what drew my attention to this car. There's also a handful of dealers built unusual cars to try and sort of attract younger people into them and things like that. And later on, Holden built the Sandman utes and vans, which were popular through the 70s. So we've got to draw a line in the sand and realise that GMH did some market research before they launched into the Sandman project, and there are examples of pre-Sandman utes and vans in existence. Now I believe, and other HKTG Holden fanatics believe as well, that this is one of them. So firstly we got the wheels. What else is unusual in this car? I could see from the advertisement, the photo from the front of the car, it's a Kingswood platform car. It had the chrome mouldings on here. It had the chrome eyebrow mouldings on the front fenders, but the bonnet didn't have them on there, and the bonnet on the car was damaged. It had a bit of a cave in the front of it. The bumper was caved in a bit, so the car had been in a bingle at some time. So I got the guy's phone number. I sent him a message, asked him for his phone number, and rang the guy and said, what's the history with the car? And he said, well, I've only just recently bought it off the original owner, and but circumstances have changed, I've got to sell it. And I said, well, is the original owner still around? And he said, yes, but he's terminally ill, so he sold the car. He doesn't need it anymore. He's gone into care. And I said, any chance you can ask him if the wheels were on the car from factory, and if by chance it used to have a Monaro bonnet on it? And anyway, a few days later, the guy got back in touch, and yes, the car came with the Monaro style bonnet, with the humps on it, and yes, the wheels were factory. So it was going to be my car from that point onwards, even though it was in another state and I had to go and trek across Australia to get the thing and get it home. But there's the point. From there, you've got to be looking at these advertisements and scouring to try and find unusual cars. My big advantage is I have spent my life working in the motor trade, and I have been around things. I've seen unusual cars in my time, and I knew that there were weird things out there. So although I wasn't looking for this car when I got it, this is what I got and I'm pretty happy about it. The other thing that's interesting was, if Deb comes over here and gets a photo from inside, I'll just shoot around the other side. When I got this car, it was column shift automatic, but it was only after I got it home and started working on it, I realised that it used to be a 4-speed, because it's got this bulge in the side of the transmission table where the gear linkages go into. Now, it was missing this little unique hump through here where the gear shifter goes through, and it had been cut out of the car and it had a plate welded across it. But the automatic conversion was complete. They had the proper accelerator linkage for the cable kick-down arrangement, they had the proper steering column and all the linkages, and right down to the yellow tail shaft. So my guess is, at some point in time, somebody with a V8 column shift HG has decided they wanted a 4-speed and come across the gentleman who owned this car. He's getting on in years, he's made the offer, if I convert your car to automatic, can I have the 4-speed stuff out of it? So I'm assuming this is what happened, because I have been guilty of the same thing myself, and it does work. So I had to then find a gearbox for the car, and within 6 months I found one. It's not quite date matching the car, which I'm a little bit unhappy about. I've got a 69 gearbox. This is a 1971 car, so if I'd found last quarter of 1970 gearbox, or probably even second quarter of 1970, given the transmissions were made in America and floated to Australia, that would have worked better for this car. But anyway, I've got what I've got, I can live with that. The engine is still the original, and it had never had the rocker covers off it. So the rest of the car is pretty much nut and bolt as it was. It was missing the bucket seats, and it was wearing some Chrysler Sigma seats at the time, which were pretty well trashed as well. So they've gone, I've found a couple of the right bucket seats. So my opinion, a car like this, you really need to give it a sympathetic restoration. It really needs to go back to what it was, because these are time capsules. They are totally unique vehicles that need to be preserved for what they are. If I hadn't bought this car and someone without Holden knowledge had come along and bought it and just built it into a nice streeter, this history would be lost forever. So I'm going to give it a very conservative restoration, but I want it to be a driver. I want to be able to use this car, and that's it. So the other thing I can learn, I'm still learning things about this car. I'll throw this in here. Another thing I learned early in the piece, if Deb can get a good shot down here, the firewall's actually split away from the floor. This car was in a severe accident as a young vehicle, and it's had all the front of the car replaced. But in the force of the accident, it has torn the spot welds across through here. There's some oxyacetylene welds through here tying the floor in here, but all this area just had a big mound of sealant put across it to seal the floor off. So we'll have a look from the other side. How do I know this was a young car when it was damaged? Right, as I said before, this car's air conditioned, and it's a little bit unique. When you look at Holden, the vast majority, and Ford and Chrysler for that matter too, the vast majority of all the accessories were dealer fit, because it slowed the assembly line down. We've got production orientated companies that were producing thousands of cars, and so if you've got to sit down and tick all these boxes and say, okay, Mr. Joe Bloggs has ordered this car and he wants a V8 or a 6-cylinder, that's okay, we'll put that in on the line. Next car comes along, they have all the parts ready. But when it comes down to having holes in panels, units fitted up underneath dashes and things like that, that was often left for the dealer to actually install later on. This car, however, has got this hole punched for the air conditioner pipes to go through. My brown ute has got it cut, and so this one has got a burr on the back of it from where the tooling went through and punched it off, and the brown ute's just got a neat hole that's been cut out and filed for the pipes to go through. Now, back to the accident repair. This front subframe that all unbolts from the firewall forward has been replaced as part of the accident repair, and this is the hole for the pipes to go through for the air conditioner condenser. Same deal, that's a punched hole. That's been stamped through the panel for those pipes to go through. On the brown ute, it's been cut, and you can actually see where they've cut and they've actually ground the edges of the hole up to make it right. So we have got an air-conditioned subframe ordered for an air-conditioned car. So when they were going through the parts list they needed to buy for the car, Naturally, they're going to need a radiator, they're going to need an air conditioner, an air conditioner condenser, they're going to need the bonnet latch panel here and things like that, and a subframe, 2 fenders and a bonnet. And the spare parts guy said, oh, there's an aircon subframe. Yep, we'll have that. So that's what's gone on the car. So how cool is that? So for this level of repair, to have exactly the right parts on it, the car must have been very young. So I'm going to draw a line and say it was within the first 12 months of its existence. So a little bit of history, but we don't have any of the factory sheet metal on the front of this car, and probably even the front suspension is not from this car. It was probably spare parts as well. So had the car been much older than that, they would have written it off just because of the cost of the parts and the level of the repair. So it makes it very new. Now, I'm trying to restore this car as conservatively as I can, but I'm making mistakes. We all make mistakes. We learn things as we go. So it had been converted to LPG. It had triple air horns on it when I bought it. It had a variety of things in and out of the engine bay. And there were even little brackets that were pop riveted in for various things that I don't know what they did, but broken off bracket and 3 or 4 pop rivet holes in the panels. So it looked a bit like a piece of Swiss cheese. And there was a myriad of holes in here. The firewall, every time someone wanted to run a new wire through, they drilled a hole through the firewall, and there was wires everywhere and bits and pieces that I pulled out of the car. So I spent one Saturday morning welding up holes in the engine bay, and everywhere where there's a bit of grey primer is where I have been welding up holes. So I'm just about to weld up a hole in the front of the radiator support. Now, there was a little self-tapper hole right next to this bigger hole. So I ground the paint off, and I was just about to start zapping across the two and filling it all in, and I suddenly look at these 2 holes and I thought, I know what fits on there. There's a relay bolt on those 2 holes. Now, one of 2 things. These had the option of a triple horn, which I don't know why you'd want a triple horn, but Holden gave you that option. So I'm drawing a line and thinking, okay, that's possible. Went to that magic place called eBay and put in NOS Holden relay, and I found the actual horn relay. Now, it fits, put it on the other side of the panel, but it just lines up on those 2 holes. So that's what goes there. The other option that used those 2 holes was the driving lights. Now, when I took the car apart, and it's still attached to the wiring harness, there was a light green wire wrapped around the headlight harness running down here. Light green is high beam on this generation Holden, and both ends of the wire had been cut off. I had just assumed that somebody had put driving lights on the car at some stage and used the high beam colour for the driving light wire. I've been guilty of the same thing myself. So this car had driving lights. I don't have quite the right relay. This one's the horn relay, but to look at, they are identical. All that is different is where the earth wire is connected up inside. So I will undo this crimp, and I've got to get it replated anyway because it's a bit second-hand looking. Get the guts out of it, and I'll shift the wire across inside, put it back together, and it will be a driving light relay, not a horn relay. Now, the driving lights are pretty easy because they're just Heller ones, and they are the same as what the GT Falcons use. So they are available, but you've got to pay money for them. So we'll track down a set and put those back on it and turn the car back to what it was. Now, next thing is, you've got a relay sitting here, you've got a battery over there. We've got to get battery power across the engine bay and over to the relay. So how would Holden have done that? So in my mind, my auto Sparky training coming in here, they would have picked up power off the alternator, which is hanging roughly here, and run the wire across with the voltage regulator wires, and then around with the headlight wires across through here, and it all works. Next thing is, Holden would have put a circuit breaker in the system. So there must be, in this car, the holes where the circuit breaker fitted. Well, originally I was looking in this area here to put it beside the relay because I previously had one of these with power windows, and it had the relay on the firewall, and right beside it was the little circuit breaker. So I knew what the breaker looked like, and there should have been 2 holes close to each other. There wasn't anything here. So then I'm thinking about the path of the wire, and I come back over here, and here's the mistake I made. There were 2 holes exactly there that I welded up, and as soon as I laid a breaker over the top of them, it lined up with the 2 holes. So I jumped in and started welding holes indiscriminately and assumed that they were all non-Holden holes, and it was only the fact that I worked out that these were 2 neat holes factory fitted holes in the subframe that I realised this car had another accessory on it that I didn't know about. So once again, car detective work. Now, I'll just throw this in here in closing. This generation Holden, these three models, HK, HT and HG, from 1968 to 1971, were the most optionable Holdens. And the story goes, if you bought the base model sedan, you could option it up to the top of the line sedan and Holden would build it for you. I also know from history that the rivalry between Chrysler, Ford and Holden was fierce. Now, everyone was looking for a better package than what their competitors had. And I've got to say it, guys, Ford really had the best option package in the form of the GS Rally Pack. The GS Rally Pack was a sporty package that you could fit to any Falcon, be it a ute, a panel van, a station wagon, and it gave you sporty wheels, a sporty dash, it gave you bucket seats and a floor shift. And I really think that was the best package available at the time. I have learned from Holden dealers, if you walked into a dealership in this era and said, well, I really want to buy a Holden, but I'm looking really closely at the Ford GS Rally Pack, they would build you a GS Rally Pack. So that is what I believe this car is something built in direct competition to the Ford GS Rally Pack. So once again, this is all stuff I've put together, talking to a lot of Holden people out there. If any of you out there have or know anything about a unique Holden built in this era, and like I say, they were very optionable. So there was enough material out there for Holden that they could have built the entire run of 3 models with every car as a unique vehicle and still not used up all the possibilities. So we are talking about some odd bod stuff out there, people, and I would be really interested to hear from people who own similar vehicles. So we'll throw it out there and see what comes back. So thanks, guys. I'm Rob Teal. For everyone who has subscribed, thank you very much. It does help us out a bit. We are still waiting on our computer motherboard to come back from Melbourne, but we've had acknowledgement that the company has received it back. So once they test it and see where the problem is, we'll know what we're doing with that. And hopefully, we'll soon be able to get back into building our typical how-to sort of videos where we're doing big production numbers. So thanks, guys. We'll catch you next time. Another little thing in hindsight, guys, that I was going to throw in, Deb just reminded me of. I'm not going to bring you a lot of the panel work on this car. There's a few little things I'll share with you. We're going to do subframe legs. They're rusted away. Pretty simple. You put repro stuff on there. It's no point trying to make your own because the repro stuff is really quite good these days. So we'll actually show you how to do that. It's not as simple as just sawing them off and butting them together and welding them up. So I'll give you a couple of options there. I've got a salvage one I'm going to put on the driver's side. I have got a brand new repro we'll put on the passenger side, and we'll do them both a little bit different to show you a couple of things there. It's had the radio hole hacked out. I'll probably bring you that when we glue the little piece back in there so we can put the original radio back in the hole. But what I want to do is get the panel work done on this car, and then when we're at the point where we can start stripping it back to painting it, we'll start making a sequence on it, and we will do a start to finish acrylic paint job on this car. Now, I've been painting 2-packs for 25 years, and that's my comfort zone. I'd rather paint 2-packs. But a lot of you guys building cars at home, acrylic is a soft option. You can achieve it in the shed at home. It's very agreeable and it's very forgiving. You can get away with a lot more. But what I like about acrylic on a car like this is what the car was painted in originally. Now, we look at cars today, muscle cars restored, and everyone loves the shiny car. And 2-packs give you shiny everywhere. Shiny engine bays, shiny door jambs, shiny dashboards, shiny everything. And it's easy to achieve. With acrylics, they come off the gun fairly flat and mottled. A good painter gets a good gloss off the gun, but it's still not the same as the cut and polished gloss on the outside of the car. So when you paint the car, you leave it dry, harden up, cut the car, buff the car, it will come up shinier than the off the gun. It doesn't matter who you are and how good a painter you are, that's just the way it is. But none of us would ever buff the insides of the door jambs or buff the dash panel and things like that. So on an acrylic car, when you open the bonnet, for example, and you're walking past the car, the level of gloss is subtly different to the level of gloss on the outside of the car. I did a GDS Monaro a few years ago in acrylic, just for the same reason, that's what they were painted in and I wanted to preserve that. But as soon as I was working on assembling the car, and I had the panels open on it, and I realised, my brain just said, wow, that's how these cars are supposed to be. That's how they were when I was a kid. And it was everything that I remember like that. And that's prompted my memory. I'll throw something else in here as well before we go. Back to the whole GMH thing on this one. All these Holdens in this era had engine bays that were painted in a bluey grey sort of colour. Now the story goes that at the end of every shift, all of the leftover paint was tipped into a pot and stirred up, and they would add black to it or blue to it, and they would use that in the engine bays and the underbodies and things like that. So it's always got a little bit of a blue tinge to it, and it was never really glossy. Some of the assembly plants, there's variants, because in Western Australia we had South Australian cars that were shipped across without the front sheet metal on them, and our subframe areas were generally left in the black transit coating. So West Australian cars would have a blue-grey firewall and a black engine bay. The exceptions were the GDS Monaros and the Broams. They had glossy black engine bays because they were the top of the line in both of those body styles. This is the interesting thing. This is still the original paint here, and we have glossy black. Now, it wasn't gloss like 2-pack. It was, once again, what I was saying about the acrylic. It was black acrylic off the gun, done by a good painter, and it brought up a good level of gloss. The bluey grey colour, that had a bit of flattening base in it to dull it off deliberately, so the engine bays would have a bit of a satin finish to them. So this comes back to this being an assembly line unique car for either a customer dealer order or one that Holden built to throw out there to test the market. So it's all interesting stuff, and I could probably talk for another 3 hours on this car, but we don't have time for that. The GoPro is going to run out of battery or overheat and die. So we will bring more of this car to you in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Rob Teal. Keep it safe, keep it real. There's more, guys. Hit and miss video or what, but anyway, like I say, once we've got our editing computer, we'll be back up to speed. Confirmation. I actually did this yesterday. I unpainted some of this car. It's had 2 resprays. So there's the original white, there's the primer layer, there's the first white paint job, there's another primer layer, and there's another white paint job on top of that. Now, looking for this and finding this has just blown me away. Here is the original white paint, here is the original blackout around the top of the doors, and there is part of the sidewinder stripe that runs down the side of the car. I started sanding back here but didn't find anything, and when you look at that, we're nearly through. There's primer showing there, so when they actually sanded the car to put the first respray on, and there's a bit of a repair here, this area got a really good sanding. But I'm going to keep whizzing my way down the side here with a little orbital sander in the hopes I'll find more, because it is a bit of a mystery where it curls and changes and things like that. We have got, yeah, we'll try and throw this up as well. Just pause it there, Deb. Here is a surviving panel van in the pre-Sandman format. Now this one was built by Sutton Motors in Sydney, and it survives today in the original paint, and like this car, it's a bit of a time capsule. So we come back to the whole thing. If anyone chooses to restore this car, they need to do a very sympathetic restoration on it. So we'll try and close off here. I'll catch you next time.